A very good morning to you on this 18th day of September. It's a Thursday morning, and you've reached us on the Fifth Connection, where we talk about the storyline of the scriptures. We talk through that storyline. And this morning, we are again in part 2 of recapping the first 3 chapters of the story in the letter to the church at Ephesus. It is true that our brains are hardwired for stories. Deep in the inner recesses of our brains, uh, the story is captured. Both the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere have distinct functions that work together. You need both hemispheres. You can't have the one without the other, because the two are joined by the corpus callosum. The right hemisphere pans out, zooms out, and the left hemisphere zooms in. And those two functions continuously are needed. One does not function without the other. Like with a camera, you zoom in because you want to see pictures, and more than that, you want to see facial features. You want to get facial recognition. So you zoom in. And then you zoom out because you want to get everybody and all of the terrain into the visual lens of the camera. And so it is when we come to stories. Stories are very significant things because they capture context. That's why on this channel we talk about storyline sense making. It's my word for that big, fat, fancy word that we use as Bible students. The word is hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, after Hermes. And hermeneutics has to do with the science of interpretation. Here we are given to talking through the storyline of the text because the story has a sense-making capacity and capability. And when we lock into the story, we are able to understand what the text says. And we are able again to come up with another big word, interpretation. What does the text mean? Not only what does the text say, but what does the text mean? And all of that is subsumed under the heading of the storyline that is running through the biblical text. That storyline, men and women, runs from Genesis through to the book of the Revelation of Christ. Book number 1 to book number 66. And so you need to pretty much know what the storyline is. And there are very simple ways of getting that storyline down. But that would be for subsequent episodes, not for this morning. This morning we want to do part 2 of the recap of the first 3 chapters, because you need to keep in mind what the whole book is all about, what the focus of the book is. The 6 chapters divides naturally into 2. From a literary standpoint, the first 3 chapters hold together because they talk about the plan for the assembly. Chapter 4 to chapter 6 hangs together in terms of the prompts for the assembly. And all 6 chapters, 115 verse lines of the story have to do with the assembly as an amoebic modality. Again, 2 words you may not be familiar with. Amoebic has to do with amoeba, and amoebas move in clusters, and they help one another, and they can navigate, and they can create a foot to walk on a surface. They are singular cellular microbes, and so they are able to move. So we talk about the assembly as an amoebic modality that moves in fidelity with the flow of reality. What's the flow of reality? The flow of reality has to do with walking in the world that is real. What is really real? Not a dream world, but a real world. And these chapters, the first 3 chapters, emphasize the plan, because reality moves toward a destiny, a destination. Reality moves with vitality in chapter 2, and in chapter 3, reality flows with novelty. Destiny, vitality, and novelty. Then in 4 to 6, we see the prompts. And these prompts are what I want to call pre-transformation prompts. They precede the actual transformation of the believer. And that's why they are prompts. They goad us into a particular direction. They poke in a direction. They motivate us into a direction. So that in chapter 4, we're going to talk about the real values in crucifixion transformation. What are the real values in crucifix transformation? And then in chapter 5, we are going to look at sacrificial ventures that believers engage in their conversation in the marketplace. Real values, sacrificial ventures. That's in chapter 5 from verse 1 to verse 6. Then in 7 to 14, what are the sinful violations that we need to watch out for? As we have opportunities to live, to navigate inside of God's world. There are pitfalls, there are snares, there are potholes. It's a minefield. What are those minefields? What do they look like? Then they move on to relational varieties in the whole process of socialization. It's called household order. What are the social categories inside of the assembly that need to be honored? What is the order that is evident inside of this modality? They are relational varieties of order, such as the family, such as government, such as the home, such as marriage, such as children, and there we go. And then the book ends off in chapter 6, from verse 10 to verse 24, with battle vigor. It ends with a wartime illustration, a battle-ready picture. That's how the book ends, and there's a very distinct reason for that, because there is a beauty in war. Now you may say, nay, nay. Well, you have to wait until we get to chapter 6, verse 10 to 24, as I unpack that part of the story in future episodes. But we are purely looking at the recap here. You will notice that stories move according to fractals and holons. What are fractals and holons? Well, a fractal is a part of a whole, but the part is a picture in and of itself. It's a whole picture, but it's a part of the big picture. It's called a fractal. Such as in a fern is a fractal. It's made up of many branches. Each branch is called a frond, Fronds. A frond. They are fronds. And the fronds are pictures of what the full fern looks like. If you break off a little branch, you have a picture of the full fern between your fingers. Life functions as a fractal of a whole, as a part of a whole. And holons are the big picture. Holons. Got nothing to do with holes as in holes, but holes as wholes. And the scriptures is filled with fractals. Every story is a fractal of a bigger fractal, of a bigger fractal, of a bigger fractal. And you have fractals all over creation. They appear in God's creation, in biology, and in every ology you can think of. It even appears in the biblical text because salvation is fractal. At the heart of what gospel salvation is death and resurrection. Death and resurrection is a fractal because it functioned in the life of Christ. He died and he rose again. But that same picture functions in biology. A seed dies in the ground only to burst forth into life once it germinates. And so these stories in the scriptures are fractals and holons. Every single story from the fall, from creation to the fall, to the flood, to the second fall in Genesis 6, where the sons of men engage, where the sons of God engage with the daughters of men. And then the third fall, the fall of the nations in Genesis 11. These stories are minute pictures of bigger things. They are parts of wholes. And when you understand the part, you will understand the whole. And that's how the brain functions, according to fractals and holons. The left hemisphere goes in and zeroes into the parts and the minutiae, and the right hemisphere pans out. It gives you the whole picture, the big picture. And so the brain functions like that all the time. But you need to train your brain. Some of us are going to go to the grave with brand new machines because we just haven't used it. You need to train your brain. Ian McGilchrist suggests that the reason Western culture is in the process of crashing and losing its foothold is because it is left hemispherically dominant. We are constantly given to analyzing things and pulling them apart. And we analyze things to death. And we think we can just put it together and we've got the whole picture. Well, that ain't how life works. Taking it apart needs to be done in limited ways. Don't think that if you just can take a thing apart, you can automatically put it together again. The parts is not the sum. The whole is not the sum of the parts. We think that. But it's extremely difficult to be doing that because life doesn't work like that. Life works according to fractals and holons. That's why you need to understand story, storyline sense making, what we call storyline hermeneutics. Don't come to the biblical story as a surgeon dissecting and chopping up the story into little bits and cutting the life out of it and killing it. Because the moment you dissect a frog, it'll die. And then we think that as long as we have these great skills of dissection and analysis, we are the bee's knees. Well, you need to be able to pan out and see the big picture, constantly panning out. And stories work like that because a story pans in and out. A story functions on the basis of the big picture, magnifying the minuscule, coming out back into the big picture. That's why storytellers are such captivating individuals. Good stories do that. So do good storytellers. Because stories function in the midst of the flow of reality. That's where the stories function at their height. So keep that in mind. Because our transformation is an unfolding story When you go from the worm to the cocoon to the butterfly, you are functioning in a way that is transformative, a way that is transforming. The worm to the cocoon to the butterfly. And finally, as we look at chapter 4, which we are going to dive in verse by verse of the storyline in the next episode, keep in mind that chapter 4 has to do with cross-shaped transformation, cross-shaped bodybuilding, because the body needs to edify itself. It's a bodybuilding enterprise where every believer in the assembly is building the body. And in the process, they build their bodies and impact the full body. It's called cruciform transformation or cruciform edification. And so that's where we're going to end off this morning. I've taken 2 episodes to map out for you a recap of where we come from and where we are headed. And so we start out in 4 verse 1 of the storyline, in that exciting section where we have the prompts for the assembly and what change looks like inside of the believing community as you and I participate in this bodybuilding exercise. As you go into this day, I trust that you will enjoy the Lord and that you will enjoy your walk with God. Goodbye for now.